First we had the metadata repository, then the data warehouse, then the big data lake. Each wave has had similar characteristics. The promise of business value, followed by frantic adoption without big picture thinking, leading to inevitable failures and disillusionment. The latest waves are about data and artificial intelligence, and once again the technology looks enticing. Let's get it right this time.
We are live.
Hello and welcome to MIT CDOIQ Symposium today. I have a great panel of experts talking about the role that empathy plays in designing data governance programs. I'll hand over to Andrew Andrews, who's National Vice President of Data Management of the Association in Australia. Welcome, Andrew, and good to have you here and the panel.
Thanks, Baz. Hi, everyone. Just to kick off the motivation for us speaking about this, it was about November last year. I was watching a YouTube video by Pharrell promoting a education series about empathy, and it didn't take me too long to realize that empathy is becoming part of the mainstream. And then I thought, well, I knew the conference was coming up, so I thought I'd do a session on propose a session to talk about empathy and data governance. So here we are. So just a couple of things. We've got polling open for this session, so please complete them through the course of the session. And we've got a bit of a surprise coming up, so we'd like your feedback on that coming up very, very soon. So myself, just a quick introduction. Andrew Andrews, Vice President of Dharma Australia. I'm also Data Governance Manager at ANZ. Been in the industry for 35 years, mostly as a consultant. And then I decided to practice what I preach and switched over and worked into management. So I took all that advice I was giving throughout my decades working for myself as a sole practitioner, and then decided to switch over to management and actually do the stuff that I was advising clients on. So it was a way of me becoming more fulfilled as a professional. So that's a little bit about me. I'll hand you over to Laura. Welcome, Laura.
Thank you, Andrew. Good morning, everybody. I'm Laura Sebastian-Coleman. I'm the Data Quality Director at Prudential Financial. Very happy to be here. I've been a data quality practitioner since the early 2000s, and I actually got my start by attending the summer seminar that Dr. Wang ran on data quality management way back in the early 2000s. So very happy to be here. Very excited to talk about this topic because I think, as Andrew implied, it's kind of something that people haven't put emphasis on. So I'll hand you over to Paul.
Thank you, Laura. Yes, so hello, Paul Davies is my name. I'm the acting head of enterprise data governance at ANZ Bank here in Australia. So I've been working in the data governance space for probably about 10 years now. Feels like a lifetime, and certainly data governance now is completely unrecognizable compared to what it was 10 years ago. I think we'd all recognize that. So this topic was definitely of interest to me because we have been rolling out an enterprise data governance framework over the last few years, and embedding that into the organization is a real challenge. So I'm looking forward to having a discussion with these other panelists about how we can use empathy to support that. That's enough about me. I'll hand over to Dora.
Thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone. Thrilled to be here this morning and speaking about this topic. I think it's so critical. My name is Dora Busies, currently working in healthcare. I work for Stryker, a wonderful organization in the medical medical technology company. Although anything I speak about today, it's not on behalf of the company. I speak on behalf of myself. A long time in this space, really played every role in IT, about 27 years now, but always very passionate about having really strong foundation that have flex and scale with really good data. So enterprise architecture and everything around data and analytics, I've focused on for probably close to 20 years now, long time. And the topic, so great, you know, if you see, even I put down transformational leader, data strategy and architecture. I drive data strategy and architecture right now for Stryker, but the fact that, you know, this is a transformational journey, which means we are transforming organizations. That includes how we work with each other, cultures. That really takes a lot of empathy, data governance, implementing it successfully. I'm so happy to be here with my co-panelists and speak about this topic and hear back from you. And with that, I'll pass it on to Mark.
Great. Thanks so much for that, Dora. And good morning, good evening, good afternoon to everybody joining in on the call. Mark Sparvel, you can see where I'm currently working on the screen. I bring with me 30 years working in the education sector, focused on change management and leading improvement. And because of that, I've become deeply interested over decades in this topic of both motivation and emotion. In fact, they both share the same Latin root word. You'll notice they both have MOT sitting in emotion and motivation. And motivation, which focuses on why people do what they do, is deeply connected to developing emotional intelligence, and empathy is the cornerstone of that. If you like, a way to consider it is, it's a productivity hack. If you're interested in the business of initiating, sustaining positive change in an organization, the foundation must be rooted in empathy, which is the cornerstone of emotional intelligence. And I've got an activity coming up for everybody in the virtual room at the moment. Andrew, if we could just progress to the next slide. It felt like it would be appropriate to start off with a little bit of a warm-up activity. That might make you smile. How chihuahua are you feeling today? On the screen, you can see you have a range of fabulous options to pop into the chat. How chihuahua are you feeling today? And while you're looking and being amused by number 1 and number 9, I just want to quickly touch on the reason for doing an emotion check-in, because beyond a novelty, an emotion check-in like this in any meeting, in any gathering, using a serious one or a humorous one, it signals an intent to everybody that you're prepared to invest time to pause, to listen, and to connect in a relational way, not just in a transactional way. It might kick off a little bit of laughter. Hopefully it did for you just then, or at least a smirk or a smile, or you might have thought of your own dog or cat, or you're an axolotl person. But the laughter has both a pleasurable but a calming effect on you. Something's happening in your brain while you're smiling or laughing. It signals safety. It also promotes a feeling of togetherness. That's the endorphins that are being released a little bit. You've just had a little squirt of endorphins in your brain just then. It's the social bonding hormone. It makes us feel closer together. We're more likely to listen, collaborate. We're more likely to act with kindness to one another because of that squirt of endorphins. And also it's reduced your cortisol levels, which, as we know, is the stress hormone, which acts as a cognitive barrier. Essentially, you've just been neurohacked by the sheer fact of going through an emotional intelligence activity. The other point I make before I pass back to Andrew is activities like this that connect us to the relational, not just the transactional, where we listen to understand and we connect with people, stimulates a part of your brain, which brain scientists, neuroscientists measure, which trigger this part of your brain called social reciprocity and emotional resonance, which basically means you move into sync with people. This is why laughter is contagious. In fact, we often refer to it as the emotion contagion effect. it's passed on to people because of mirror neurons, because of those processes that I just talked about and the chemical mix in your brain. But bottom line, you've just been neurohacked. You're welcome. And we'll pass back to Andrew. Andrew.
Thanks, Mark. So,
Andrew, this is just chipping in there. I'm looking at the poll results which have come in, and majority of people are putting either a majority of the responses are a 7.
Oh, could we have a look back, Andrew, at 7? Okay.
they're happy and content.
Happy and content. There you go.
Or they're stunned. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is such an unusual topic for a data conference, I think. So if people are happy on the call, that's a good sign.
Over to you, Andrew.
Thanks, Baz. So just a quick prelude to my conversation, the start of it anyway. So I think one of the outcomes that we want here is that we want to sort of send the signal out into the practitioner community that it's okay to be a data practitioner and be empathetic at the same time. If we help to change mindsets, or at least get the conversation started to help change mindsets, that's a great outcome. Just wanted to sort of put it out there that it's about generating a conversation about how we challenge ourselves to bring social and emotional intelligence practices into the data management, data governance, data quality practice that we're all taught, either at work or at, part of doing a certificate. We've got questions in the chat. We're here to have fun, and we've got some questions in the sessions, and we've also got the polls as well. So I wanted to, I can stop sharing now. So I wanted to sort of start by explaining the reason for this, talking about empathy and data governance. It's a bit of a passion thing for me. I come from a migrant background, and my parents have, and my grandparents have been through war, have had to go to a new country, restart their life, set up businesses, sell businesses. And I was just an observer for the most part. And especially with my grandparents and my father. And they were so empathetic in the way they just dealt with people. And they knew that if it wasn't for their empathy, they would be out of business. So I learned those traits and behaviors when I was a little kid. So as a practitioner, and when I started being a consultant, I just used empathy as just a core foundation part of my job. So that's the reason why I believe empathy is so important to me. And then I looked in the corporate world, and the corporate world is something different, because the corporate world looks at structuring things very precisely. Form follows function, and when you deliver data governance, you deliver data governance based on a formula, potentially. And I asked myself, well, the formula is missing one key ingredient, and the key ingredient is how you deal with people. How do you bring people along? So I wanted to have this conversation today so that we can actually talk amongst ourselves and with the broader community about how we integrate the social and emotional intelligence aspects into the conversation about delivering data governance programs. And data governance program, to me, or to us actually, this is not just me, it's actually the whole group of us. It's about putting a framework in place where you've got two simultaneous objectives. You've got a framework for policy and making sure that there's rigor and that risks are managed well. And then there's the other part of it is innovation and change and transformation. So how do you achieve both if you don't have the human on board? So I think that's been the missing element in a lot of ways, and it's certainly something that's not explicitly taught or explicitly baked into the delivery of data governance programs. So that's the reason why I wanted to have this conversation today. open up the discussion, get the panelists on, get the audience in, have the discussion. And so that's a quick, excuse me. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is, as a change agent over my years as a consultant, there's a lot of battle scars. And all of us who have been in this business for long enough would have come with some baggage, which is the learning, I suppose. And I wanted to use those learnings as an opportunity to change behaviors or help change behaviors. So that's just experience. And if we can share some of our experiences with people who haven't been through those experiences, if we can help them change direction and actually make a change in their own direction or in the work that they do with their colleagues, that's a really important lesson for us to share with our community. So, Laura, you just published a book, and you've got a chapter in there about the ways in why data governance has not fulfilled its promise. Why do you think data governance often leaves out people?
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that I think one of the reasons that data governance has not fulfilled its promise is because it has not listened to its own conversation about the importance of engaging people. So I think there's a number of factors that get in the way when we start to talk about data governance. First is the terminology itself. Data, governance, neither of those words is warm and fuzzy. They're perceived as technical, they're perceived as cold and bureaucratic. So, and they're not, and neither is perceived of bringing people in. Neither has that connotation. The second goes to a point that you just made about the emphasis on structure in corporate life. So a lot of organizations, they recognize they need to govern their data, but in order to get there, they either adopt a standard framework or they bring in a consultancy to help them implement a standard framework. And all of the emphasis is really on that framework itself, rather than on either the engagement that's required to be successful or solving the particular problems within a given organization. And those challenges within each organization tend to be particular to the culture of the organization, and the culture is really about how the people behave. And that's hard to work through. So it's not surprising that people get left out of the equation, because the people that are trying to implement governance are really focused on things other than people. And to just kind of put the final nail in the coffin on this, a lot of times governance programs are measured on things that don't have to do with the ultimate outcomes, which are how do we change people's behavior around data so we get more value from it. Instead, they're focused on more measurable characteristics like, you know, how many policies do you have? How many have you implemented? Or, you know, how many words do you have in the glossary? Those kinds of things that, you know, make it easier to quantify, but don't really get at, as I said, at the end game, which is how do we get more value from our data? And that always depends on changing people's behavior and getting them to adapt new behaviors that are more focused on the value of data.
So, excuse me, Laura. Has anyone given any thought to these challenges?
Well, yeah, interestingly, a lot of very smart people have given a lot of really thoughtful work to this. So my beginning point for data governance is Gwen Thomas and the Data Governance Institute, and her book on data governance, which is entitled Alpha Males and Data Disasters, for me sums it up. You know, what she's focusing on is behaviors around data that produce undesirable outcomes. So her whole reason for advocating for governance is, in fact, in order to change behaviors. And then you have, John Ladley has written on this, and his focus has been on change management. You really have to get people engaged and enable them to change. The DMBOK 2 has a chapter on change management in the context of data management. And its chapter on organizational roles also is deeply informed by change management practices. ISO 900, the data quality or the data management standard, talks about the need for people engagement, customer focus, and systems leadership. Danette McGilvery's 10 steps. Step 10, which is the foundation piece to all the other steps, is to communicate, manage, and engage people throughout. And finally, Tom Redmond talks about getting ordinary people involved, getting everybody involved. He talks about it in different ways, but he harkens back to Deming and Duran, the founders of quality management. So everybody's talking about it, and it's kind of an open secret that improving the quality of data, improving the governance of data requires culture change, it requires people engagement, but it is hard. And I think people revert to getting the structure in place and counting the policies and stuff rather than doing the people part, because people tend to, they don't always understand what you want them to do. They do it more slowly than you want them to do it. And so it can be frustrating, and people revert to the technical sides, because the technical sides ultimately are much easier than the people side of things.
Thanks, Laura. Dora, you've given a lot of thought, and you said this in your introduction to the relationship between people and technology. In your role, you're trying to transform your organization. How have you used your own personal empathy skills and your values in the role that you have as a leader in transformation projects?
Thanks, Andrew. I think actually can't really do justice to the role without being empathetic and really modeling many of the behaviors that we're all been talking about here this morning. So for me, being very intentional about it, at the same time, being very authentic about it. And what I mean by saying being intentional to really listen with the intent to understand, not with the intent to respond. And really making a conversation about how do I get the folks in the organization really to engage in this journey. We all know that data governance is a journey. It takes a lot of effort. And by the way, just a little parenthesis, in your organization, if you call it data governance, if you call it data management, if you call it information management, we don't have one single standard name for this. We're really talking about this effort to get more out of our data, be able to get to it, all of the technical aspects about it. But to make that happen, yes, we need the structure. Yes, we need the framework, because there needs to be some guidance there, things that we talked about. But at the end of the day, it is really the people in the organization that will apply it. And it needs to become a conversation of the way I've approached it is not from the perspective of this is data governance, thou shalt do X, Y, Z, but more from the perspective of, okay, what is the problem? How can I help you? Listen to understand the situation and what might be some motivators behind, the behavior of the other person, but really show that empathy and being intentional about it. I think at the macro level in transforming the organization, really, there needs to be specific time investment effort as well to get folks to understand it and apply it every day. More of us, it doesn't take just one person, more of us, and really make it part of culture of how we work together. I would add, Andrew, that in doing this, Laura said it, it's not an easy thing to do. All habits change hard. We all know with data governance, we're trying to get folks across divisions, across functions to work together. That's a different mindset. That's a lot of why enterprise data governance, data management brings to the play. Very hard to change those habits. So I would say, along with being empathetic and listening and being consistent and being resilient with it as well. This is, and being authentic about it. This is not we do it once and it's gonna happen. This is really being in it for the long term and approaching it with the intent to, how can I help you? And that actually works its way for the more structured ways of data governance and the practices and everything that can make it better for us to get to the data, be the good data. That's going to come along as well. That works out. That's what I've seen in my experience, Andrew. Work better than other ways, not doing it so.
So Dora, just a couple of things. In the pack that goes with this session, we've got a checklist that says what empathy is and what it's not. So I think that's a bit of a guide. And I think one of the things you just mentioned is the fact we don't teach people to be empathetic. Do we, when we're delivering data governance, do we actually take them through social emotional intelligence and understand the theory behind it and why it's and to Mark's point, why it matters? Do we
no,
do we make that, do we bake them in to the program? And it's one of our poll questions. Do we do it? I haven't seen it in my career.
So explicitly listed, I've never seen it. Not as part of data governance. I would say, however, when I'm seeing sometimes, and really I'm seeing it more lately, and not so much related to data governance, but more about the culture and how we work with each other. I have seen organizations actually invest time and effort specifically to the culture of the organization. There is a culture of being grateful and empathetic and listening and working together to help each other, collaboration, transparency. So I've seen some efforts in terms of building up the culture that's not specific to data governance. It can be used for anything and everything that we do in our organizations. Obviously, data governance benefits from it as well. But I have never in my career, and especially data governance, I'm in healthcare right now, back with the financial crisis. I was working for G Capital Financial Services. Folks in the financial space, we know we had to really pay a lot of attention into this to do it. I've never in my career working in the space seen it explicitly be part of data governance. But like Laura said, it's kind of like the open secret there. We just need to do more of it, and it does make a difference to the success of the data governance program.
Thanks, Dora. Mark, as you quite impactfully told us in the intro, you're an expert in emotional intelligence, and emotional intelligence is a kind of cultivated form of empathy, and you're an educator. And you talk with educators from around the world. What has learning about emotional intelligence taught you about changing people's behavior around data?
Okay, good question. And I love this conversation so far. I've just been jotting notes down, listening to Laura and Dora, and looking forward to Paul. So I'll just touch on those first. I mean, just at a top level, one of the things I'm often accused of is being Mr. Smiley Face Sticker. That this focus on emotional intelligence, in teaching that to Dora's point in very intentional and not accidental ways to adults and to students, is all about sunshines and unicorns and lollipops. But a comment that I make to people is, on the back of every smiley face sticker is an adhesive. It's built by science. It's a collection of polymers, reactive, non-reactive. It's a science that makes the smiley face sticker stick. And activities in organizations that focus on lifting people's emotional intelligence sticks because of the science behind it. It sticks because of the 30 years work, longitudinal studies in positive psychology, new findings happening in neuroscience, deeper understandings in the social science. The reason the smiley face sticker sticks is because of the science on the back of it. So that would just be one comment. I think Dora raises a really good point, which is about that this is connected to whole culture, not just the data governance processes. I mean, on an unrelated topic, I actually talk quite a lot about how emotions are data, but that's a kind of a separate topic. But it does come back even to the kind of the cute chihuahuas at the start. People identified based upon a quick scan what they thought was happening in those dogs. The truth is we don't know. Okay, we actually don't know, which is why collectively, if you're involved in managing change or transitional transformation in organizations, seeking to understand, becoming an emotion, if you like, an emotion detective, not an emotion judge, is the most critical way to develop the skill of empathy. Seek to understand, listen to understand, don't listen to respond, and don't listen to solve, but listen to understand, because, you know, empathy, you know, it's a tricky area, but it's in the sense that it's not about you claiming to understand how somebody else is experiencing a situation. Because the truth is, to Andrew's opening about his family background, we can never really understand Andrew or his parents' lived experience, what they've had, because we're always going to be on the outside of it. We can never know. Everybody's situation is unique. But real empathy, and both Dora and Laura have already picked this up, and I think we've seen that modeled by Andrew. Real empathy is that ability that you develop. It's a skill that we can all learn to listen to understand why somebody is thinking, feeling, acting in a particular way through their perspective. And it doesn't slow work down, and it's not a vulnerability. In fact, the real vulnerability in any organization that's focused on change, to go back to your question, Andrew, the real vulnerability isn't empathy. The real vulnerability is fear, because in all organizations, when we're implementing a new data governance model, a new hygiene, a new interoperability standard, a new naming convention, a new whatever it might be, a new Power BI dashboard, whatever it might be we're tackling, we're working, all of us in this room, virtual room right now, you're all working against fear. That's the vulnerability. The vulnerability in the room is people's fear of change, no matter what the change, whether it's big, like a data governance structure, or whether it's small, like purchasing a coffee maker. Will I get buyer's remorse? Will my coffee be great in the morning? People are often afraid of the unknown. And emotional management, empathy being a critical part of that, is that skill that infiltrates your professional practice over time. It has the contagion, to Dora's point, to the whole culture. And yeah, it's the very thing that makes many leaders break out into a cold sweat, because often they can't see, or they, to Andrew's point, they haven't had any training at all, which has cued them in to the fact that empathy is rooted in curiosity, to be either curious about people, to be curious about systems, to be curious about impact, to be curious about perspectives. So I guess my comment would be, in the years that I've worked in change leadership, in education transformation, is I'll often say, people will say, let's talk about digital transformation of the education sector. I'll say, great, let's talk about human transformation, because, you know, we've got to place the humans at the center of that, because if we don't, the net sum result, it's always non-sustainable, because compliance is a really poor substitute for motivation, and motivation is unlocked through emotion. Back to you in the studio.
Thanks, Mark. That sends shivers. When we have talk about that, it sends shivers down my spine. That's how close I get to this sort of material. So thanks, Mark.
Just to jump in there, and I'm looking at the poll, we've had 18 responses to your question, which was, when you hear the term empathy in relation to data governance programs, what thoughts come to mind? And the number one response in the 18 questions was understanding. So just to support what Mark just said. Thank you.
Thanks, Baz. So, Paul, as you mentioned in your intro, you've been leading data governance for well over a decade, and it's changed a lot in the time that you've been in the leadership role. So, in the conversations that we've had in this panel, how do you think we as a community can think differently about the role of empathy in data governance? How can we as leaders approach the problem to get the message out and embed that into organizations? How do you think we start? Where do we start, I suppose?
Yeah, okay, all right. Difficult question. So I guess first of all, I just wanted to sort of touch on a couple of other things that people have raised. Laura, I think I might be one of those people who started off by measuring the easy things, right? When we first set out to roll out the data governance framework across the organization, as you say, there's some really easy things that you can measure, and that's what we did, and we managed to show some progress pretty quickly. But then we soon realized, we were getting ticks in a box. Really, we weren't actually changing the organization in any meaningful way. We weren't getting the real benefits that we were looking for. And you know what, even I think even as time has progressed, obviously we've got a lot smarter about that. I think we are doing things better than we were at that point. But even now, the reality is that there is a lot of pressure on us. We've got regulations we need to be responding to. We've got business priorities. Potentially, we've got cost reductions and other things that we're having to deal with. And it is so often that the work that gets left behind is exactly this work, right? It's we end up trying to really do this on the side of our desks, if you like. We're trying to run a change program, but actually we're not giving it the investment that it actually deserves. So, and I think, Dora, that's the point that you were making. It needs to be intentional, right? It really needs to be intentional. And I think an interesting journey that my team has been on over the last few years is we did actually, about maybe 3 years ago, we did recruit a couple of people specifically with change type experience to help with the rollout. And obviously we'd learned from some of the earlier work that we'd done. When they first started, what we found was we were generally actually just using them for comms, right? They were doing communication. So they were telling people, we've released a new standard. We've done some great work over here on data quality and whatever else. And that was fine, but that's all it was. It was a one-way, I guess, communication of information. And then with time, we realized that actually we needed more depth than that. So we started they started doing some learning work or education work, right? So actually educating people around data governance matters. And then maybe 18 months ago, or maybe even 12 months ago, that really morphed into a much stronger change team. So doing, with professional change management expertise, and actually taking that as the primary center of their role. And interestingly, talking to the lead of that function today, he was telling me that we are pivoting. He wants to pivot towards different terminology. He wants us to be more of, or wants his team to be more of a marketing function, because in his mind, change is about a once-off. We're doing a change and then we sort of all go off. Whereas data governance isn't like that. Data governance is ongoing. So he's pitching it more as internal marketing that we're just going to have to keep on doing, and it's going to build with time. And we've got a set of stakeholders that we're going to have to manage in a very professional manner, pretty much. So I think and sort of having had that conversation today with this guy Dave, and then listening to what my co-panelists are saying, it does actually resonate really well. And I think maybe coming back to your question, Andrew, empathy is obviously important in any kind of change. We all know that, and I think we've spoken about that enough. I do think, though, having been involved in a lot of change initiatives prior to data governance, I do think that it is particularly important in the data governance space, because the change we are trying to make, as has been noted a couple of times, is we're actually trying to change a culture. And changing a culture is really hard. And the reason we're trying to change a culture is because we are trying to get people to not only understand and interact with their data in a different way than what they've done previously. We are also trying to get them to do things and to take on responsibilities and even accountabilities that they didn't have previously. And often with data governance, unfortunately, the benefits are not immediate. So the benefits generally come with time. So you're not going to be able to persuade people, with a 6-month payback that, you need to change your behavior here, because often that payback's going to be over several years. So therefore you've really got to build that into the culture of the organization. That is, really, I guess, much more ingrained than maybe a lot of other change activity that I've personally been involved with.
So Andrew, I'm gonna jump in because I can't
Please.
hold back.
Please.
So for those of you that aren't on the panel, we've met numerous times and have had an ongoing conversation about this. And each time that we have done that, I learned something from these folks. So as Mark was talking, and he pointed out that compliance is a poor substitute for motivation. I wrote that down because I was thinking about the keynote that I sat in on yesterday, where one of the speakers said that, the purpose of regulation is to build trust. You know that things are going to be fair, and that trust is the groundwork for being able to share information. Paul, when you just said, the benefits are not immediate, you realize that one of the challenges is if you can't show people the immediate benefits and you're asking them to comply, how do you also in that process try to motivate them? And that too, I think, requires empathy, right? You have to empathize with their position of being unsure, uncertain. Maybe there's a big dose of fear there, as Mark pointed out, because they don't know what the future will hold. But you want to ask them to change their behaviors in order to build those foundations of trust, so that you can change behaviors that everybody benefits from. I know I've been talking about the importance of developing data quality standards. I've talked about it for a long time, and I try to frame it like this: if we can get the stakeholders in a room, come to consensus on what we want this standard to be or that standard to be, and we get genuine consensus, we only have to make that decision once, right? So I've kind of sold it on the efficiency side of things. But as I'm thinking through this problem of empathy, the benefit of going through a process where you actually get people to come to consensus and do so in a way where they can be heard and their views are accounted for and taken into the final product, then you build that trust. And that really is where we need to go with data governance, that I think that the coldness and the bureaucratic, the reputation for bureaucracy means that people don't trust data governance, which is very counterproductive because you really do want people to change. So it's great to hear the conversation and to tie back to the question that you put in the poll, Andrew, and that Dora responded to. You know, most data governance programs do not specifically call out empathy as a skill that people can develop and employ, but we have to do it, because if we don't understand the problems that people face with data and the things that slow them down, then we can't help them solve those problems. So it's right at the heart of the process in my mind.
And Laura, if I can just jump in here for just a second.
I was going to suggest that. Dora,
yeah,
go for it.
Thank you, Andrew. Well, Laura just said, you know, we have to do it. You know, in our space, I'm sure we've all heard so many times that do this framework, bring in this technology, or, you know, the subject matter expertise around data governance. You just said, Laura, we have to do it. And that resonates with me so much. There's just no shortcut to successfully really transforming the organization and really, you know, to get that value out of data we want to. We know bringing in these data governance, data management best practices will help us. It is for the benefit, but I think so often we have this mindset of just, you know, instant gratification almost, want to see that benefit right away, or bring in the technology and it will do it, or just put in this policy in place and we'll do it. It's people that do all of that. I mean, I don't care how much automation we put in there, the human factor, it's not going to really go away, right? For this to really stick, and we just cannot shortcut our way to it really being successfully implemented without putting in the hard work. I think Paul said it, right? It's hard work for this to do it, but it's also almost like that secret to really making it stick, making it happen, to get those other benefits. We get those other benefits around data from data governance by focusing on how we relate and work with each other and build that trust and credibility to bring into it. So, and yeah,
I'll join in the jumping in. Just Paul, I just really loved that you kind of like flagged the tensions that sit here, because there are tensions, there are mandatory, there are compliance issues, there are imposed timelines, deliverables on everybody listening into this meeting. I think the fact that somebody like you in your role recognizes that they're there, these are the reality, that in itself is kind of like vulnerable leadership, which in itself is kind of a hallmark of sort of somebody who has developed some empathy. Like, okay, we have these requirements, these things must happen. But when you're working with teams through a process to navigate those, and they're hearing from the leadership team that there are some things which we just have to do and they need to be done in this time frame. When people do it together, then the resistance is lowered. When it's done essentially it's learning. I mean, I'm in the business of learning. Learning is a social process, right? It's something done best together. Anything involving change management, change leadership, transformation is essentially learning new cultures, new roles, new responsibilities, new processes. Learning is fundamentally social and emotional. Without the social and emotional, there is no learning. Therefore, there is no change, which is what we've been talking about. How do we change behaviors in organizations? I think the other interesting bit that came up, and I think both Dora and Laura touched on it, you know, when people think this stuff is something being added onto my plate, Paul's busy plate that he described, the other flip to think about it is it's the plate itself. And it's not something being added to the plate. It is the plate, the human context within which we work. And I think, you know, there's that great quote, I'll misquote it, but that one that people will forget, you know, what great change you led. With teachers, I would say that kids will forget how great that maths lesson was that you designed for them, but they'll remember how you made them feel for the rest of their lives. That's the kind of the awesome and terrifying potential of change management with humans. This is the wetware that we're talking about, not just the hardware, but the wetware that sits between people's ears. It's how we unlock innovation in organizations, and it actually is how we drive productivity. And I think, to Paul's point, one of the bits around, like, motivation's complex in itself. You know, humans are motivated to acquire, to bond, to comprehend, defend. That's why humans biologically are primed to do stuff, to acquire, to bond, to comprehend and defend. And when any of those are kind of activated, an example would be might be defending my job function. You're introducing a new shift of change. You know, instantly that's triggering defend. Like, I'm defensive. That's my emotions serving to protect me. Our brains don't care whether we're happy. Our brains care whether we survive. So something triggers that. I'm under attack. You're attacking my position. Instantly triggers defend. Motivation slides. My attention gets redirected by my brain to defending myself, not to the benefit, the value over time of the process. So, you know, that everybody's bringing up this really fascinating pieces. I think if I was going to make one comment, it would be, I always go back to the science to move away from the front of the smiley face sticker to the science at the back of it. What's the information? And this is a group of clever sort of data people. So, you know, when you look at data for companies, you know, 90% of top performers in the workplaces have high emotional intelligence. You know, it's just a fact that's been generated lots of times. You see on the 2016 empathy index of large organizations, the top 10 most empathic companies outperformed the bottom 10 by 50% in productivity, in earnings, and in growth. Again, to my comment right at the start, you know, make no mistake, it makes the workplace better, and everybody feels better about their job, their role, when they can see how they're contributing together. But it is also a productivity hack. It's a way of driving innovation and change forward in a way that's sustainable. But yeah, I'll get off that soapbox and pass it back to you.
Thanks, Mark. We're about 7 minutes over budget in terms of time, and Baz, I'm sure, has got a number of questions that he wants to throw at us from the floor, from the audience. So let's spend the last 7 minutes, 8 minutes that we've got, and have a conversation with the audience and what they've put forward.
Yeah, we've had about 6 questions in, and I'm going to group them because of time. Just to sort of say, you know, how do we put, just summarizing 2 or 3 of them into one question, how do we put the metrics in place in a data strategy so we can measure empathy?
Who wants to take that one?
I mean, I'm happy to in a quick way, and then Dora, I can see you're on mute. I beat you to it. You know, this really is around, like, we're talking essentially sentiment analysis, and that in itself isn't necessarily a complex thing to undertake. Doing those kinds of, again, we treasure what we measure, right? So I think the collective questions are a good one. If we treasure what we measure, and we actually invest time to generate, whether it's like a let's not call it a well-being index, an empathy index, or a emotional intelligence quotient index measure. If you did that, you know, at the start, and then you concluded that at the end, you can certainly track and measure the fluctuation of emotions. As I said, emotions literally mean to be in motion. So even something simple, I wouldn't use the chihuahuas, I would use a little bit more of a serious emotion check-in, but using something as simple as that, at least it signals an intent to recognize that emotions are involved in the transition of change. Dora?
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. I would say that what I would add is, indirectly, the way that we can also measure is through the more traditional measures as well. So let me give an example. If we measure, for example, user adoption over time of something like a data catalog, a business glossary, right? It's fundamental tool we're using in data governance, get folks together, like Laura was saying earlier, get the consensus, get those harmonized definitions and so forth. Typically, we keep track of that, let's say in a data catalog, business glossary kind of a tool, right? What is the user adoption over time? In my mind, indirectly, if we see that going up, if we see more people using it, going to it as the go-to place to get answers, what I talk to for this data versus the other, just as an example, that means people are engaged, people are working together, people start trusting it. In my mind, that sticks, and we see those benefits indirectly because to get there, we are fostering that environment and that culture of, yeah, there's that credibility, that trust, that collaboration, that engagement. And it's not at one point in time, it is ongoing. Obviously, to Mark's point earlier too, measuring these things over time and see how they're trending, I think it's a good indication. So that's just an example. And I think it's an indirect way to also measure how well we're really doing this.
Thanks, Dora. Thanks, Mark. Baz, next question.
Yeah. Just next question is kind of more functional and organizational in terms of how, and the word is around shiny object, or the words shiny object. And so you're basically doing data governance. It's kind of a discipline there. But then the investment is going into advanced analytics, in AI, the new shiny object, yeah? And so how do you make data governance and data sharing and data compliance more exciting and shiny? This question.
Paul, Laura, who wants to have a response on that?
So I'll do a quick response. I'm not a marketing person at all. Like others on the call have, when we've been meeting, they've talked a lot about marketing and that kind of thing. I don't know that the goal is to make data governance a shiny object, but I do think that data governance needs to be in a better relationship to the work that goes on with data. So we don't have to be sexy like data scientists, but we do need to support that work. We need to make clear how governance adds to that. And again, I'll give the example of data standards, right? There are statistics on how much time data scientists spend either finding data, cleansing data, doing all this preliminary work with data when we really want them to be using the data. So if we have well-governed data, that means the data is well-defined, it is appropriately accessible, we know its quality, and we know what it can and can't be used for from an ethical perspective. If all of that is set up and those are the guardrails, then when data scientists go in to use that data, they spend a lot less time finding, cleansing, figuring out and they can do their work. So I think the health of the data science program can be directly connected to the work that's done by governance. Governance shouldn't be shiny, right? It should be almost invisible if people are following the rules and the standards and the guidelines. They don't have to think about it. They can just get the data they need and use it effectively. That would be a better situation in my mind. So, Paul, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think everything you're saying there is true, and it's probably where I was originally going. But the other thought I had is that actually, compared to data science, data governance is hard. Right? It's a lot harder. What we're trying to do is a lot harder than what a data scientist is trying to do. All they're trying to do is look at I'm not saying it's easy, but there may be very smart mathematicians and so on, but they're just dealing with the data. We're not just dealing with the data, we're dealing with the people, as as we've discussed at length, and all the problems and issues that come with people. People aren't easy, especially when you've got lots of them and together they make a culture.
Yep.
But, you know, so I think, to be honest, I think that is how I like to sell it is, sure, if you really love playing with data and doing, you know, really cool analytics, then data governance is not for you. But if you're actually interested in changing an organization, then you know, data governance is data governance is the right place for you. And then I think the point that you were making, Laura, is probably more the organizational argument, which is, well, you know, you could have 100 data scientists working, or you could have 20 data scientists, because actually the data they're using is already good quality, well organized, etc. So data governance actually in that case actually supports all of your other your strategies and so on around data.
Thanks, Paul.
Not to sound like a data scientist, but I agree with you 100%.
One final question. This is from more of a leadership executive level question for the panel, which is, you know, Mark pointed out the companies which are empathetic and understand emotional intelligence are more successful. But also data shows that companies which understand the strategic value of data and are what I call datafied are 19 times more profitable than those who are not. Okay, that's a McKinsey report. What role does executive leadership play in bringing together the importance of data culture and empathy in data management?
Could I pick that one up?
Okay.
Baz, if that's all right.
Yeah.
We don't have a lot of time either. We're almost at time already, right?
Yeah.
So I think one of my passions, and it's probably been my whole career actually, is educating executives that they should be valuing data just like they do people, property, and humans and assets. You know, it should be a balance sheet item. Data should actually be on our balance sheets. It should be measured on our P&L. So I think there's got to be, I think there's a question of more education around executives about the value of data and the cost to business if the data isn't fit for purpose.
Right.
And the manual workarounds that you do because someone upstream hasn't done something right, and so someone downstream has to do more work to make it fit for purpose so that you can send it out into a board report. So I think I've answered your question correctly, but that's my, I think everyone on this call, we've all got a part to play in educating executives around valuing data as an asset and giving them the skills to value them just like they do dollars and cents and people and property.
Probably just one thing I'd add to that, which sort of goes back to that question, is if you're not successful with that, if you don't have executives right from the top who value data, you're going to struggle, to be honest, right? So if you're not in that position already, you've got to prioritize that, because anything which requires this extent of change through a business has to be supported from the top. And I think in the time that I've been in my current organization, I've seen that shift from having executives who really knew nothing and didn't care much about data to ones who are actually quite focused on it, and it's made a real difference. And you can really it really highlights to me that it's essential that you have executives who are who really do value data.
Well, I think Andrew and the team and the panel here, thank you so much for all your insights and discussion here. It was fascinating to hear them, and empathy and understanding is so key to a data governance program and embedding them. Thank you for enlightening the panel here, the symposium here with your thoughts and your insights. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Baz.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you, Baz.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks to MIT as well. Thank you. Cheers.
Thank you.